The Wallachian, Romanian prince Vlad the Impaler, better known as Dracula, gained his freedom after a long captivity and married the cousin of the Hungarian king, almost a princess. At first glance, it may seem like a fairy tale, but the history was far from simple. King Matyas thought that his cousin could not have children, so he offered her in marriage to Dracula. However, it turned out that the king was mistaken about his cousin, and as they say, do not dig a pit for someone else, you will fall into it yourself. King Matyas of Hungary was once saved by his relative, who helped him strengthen political alliances twice. The first time it happened in 1458, when Matyas was still young and held captive by the Czechs. On January 24, 1458, Matyas was elected as the King of Hungary, but he couldn't come to the country and assume the throne because the Czechs were holding him captive. They agreed to release him only in exchange for a huge ransom, which amounted to 60,000 gold coins. Matyas's family, although considered wealthy, did not have such an enormous sum. At that time, a wealthy man named Szent Miklósi Pongrác agreed to provide the missing money, but on the condition that his son, Václav, would marry Matyas's cousin, Ilona Siladi. When they ransomed Matyas and he ascended the throne, the Szent Miklósi Pongrác family received 2 castles for their assistance. Ilona Siladi was married off to Václav Szent Miklósi Pongrác. King Matyas forgot about her for 17 years, but remembered her when he once again needed similar assistance in a political alliance. He decided to use the family connections to regain the trust of the Roman Pope and Italian rulers, who were reluctant to finance a new crusade against the Turkish Sultan. For this purpose, he required Ilona as a live hostage. In 1475, Ilona reached the age of 30. She had been a widow for some time, and she did not have any children from her previous marriage to Václav. This circumstance became a significant factor in the events that followed. King Matyas, in making his second decision regarding Ilona's marriage, took note of her infertility, as well as the fact that Ilona had an older sister who also remained childless despite marrying before her. In the Middle Ages, such coincidences were considered omens of infertility, and women often became victims of this belief. Infertility was regarded as an inherited trait, and if sisters turned out to be childless, the blame was attributed to them and not their husbands. Ilona, who by all indications could not have children, became the ideal candidate to aid in appeasing Dracula. King Matyas had held Dracula in captivity for over 10 years and spread rumors about his monstrous cruelty. Dracula was imprisoned on false charges of conspiring with the Turkish Sultan and attempting to lure Matyas into a Turkish trap, even though he was innocent. The horrific rumors about him were only a quarter true. Furthermore, Dracula was aware that the king was involved in spreading these rumors, and that these rumors were actively encouraged at the Hungarian court. Dracula had many reasons to be dissatisfied, and if Matyas released him without a significant reason, Dracula could have become a vengeful enemy. Therefore, the offer to become relatives seemed like the best solution in this situation. Matyas had it all planned out. Formally announcing the marriage between Ilona and Dracula, he knew that in reality, the family connection would be tenuous, because no children would be born in this marriage. Later, this marriage could be dissolved, but for the time being, Dracula had to consider himself obligated. The king convinced Dracula that it was a great honor, expecting obedience in return. The primary goal of this scheme was to restore the trust of the Roman Pope and Italian rulers, who were unwilling to finance a new crusade against the Turkish Sultan. Previously, they had allocated 40,000 gold coins to Matyas, but he had spent the funds and had not embarked on the campaign. To justify his inaction, Matyas accused Dracula of sabotaging the crusade, portraying him as a collaborator with the Turks. Despite the Italians believing this accusation, they ceased financing, fearing that their funds would also be squandered. Matyas aimed to regain his reputation and secure new funds by declaring Dracula innocent and offering him as the face of a new crusade, as his fearsome reputation could strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Ilona was required as a key figure to successfully execute this plan. Initially, the idea of marrying Dracula did not appeal to Ilona. Horrific rumors of Dracula's cruelty, such as cutting off a peasant's hands and disemboweling his pregnant lover, filled her with fear. However, in the end, Ilona agreed to this marriage, influenced by a sense of duty, much as it had been 17 years ago. Although Ilona had already fulfilled her duty to her family by marrying once before, King Matyas had leverage to exert pressure on her. She could suffer, as could her father, if she refused. Matyas often employed methods like imprisonment and arrest to subdue those who resisted. Even blood kinship did not guarantee the safety of Ilona and her family, as was the case with Matyas's uncle, Mihaly Siladi. Ilona made the decision to marry Dracula, sacrificing her own interests for the sake of others. She understood the importance of avoiding conflicts between her father and the king. Furthermore, she was explained the strategic significance of this marriage for the Christian world and the execution of a new crusade. Ilona's marriage to Dracula began with difficulties. Ilona was a calm and devout woman, while Dracula, who had spent many years in captivity without female companionship, did not understand why his wife fulfilled her marital duty without enthusiasm. Soon, their relationship deteriorated, and Dracula even decided to build a separate house in another city, expressing his intent to separate. However, Ilona discovered she was pregnant, which changed the entire situation. Ilona, despite her previous experience with infertility and her sister's experience, surprised everyone by giving birth to a son. This moment altered the game and perplexed King Matyas, who had hoped that the marriage to Dracula could be dissolved due to the absence of offspring. The birth of a son transformed Ilona's view of Dracula. She felt that God had shown her mercy after a prolonged period of infertility. In her perspective, the arrival of a son indicated that Dracula wasn't as much of a sinner as he had been portrayed, certainly not a monster. During that era, having a son was seen as a greater blessing than having a daughter. In 1476, King Matyas decided to strengthen his dynasty by marrying Princess Beatrice of Aragon, hoping to establish a new royal dynasty and leave his mark in the history of Hungary as Matyas I Corvinus. However, his plans didn't come to fruition, as Beatrice turned out to be barren, and divorce was impossible due to financial commitments and political consequences. Instead, Matyas decided to make his illegitimate son, Janos, the heir, and compelled the entire nobility to swear allegiance to him. However, after Matyas's death, the promises were forgotten, and Dracula's descendants continued to rule Wallachia, the Romanian land, until the end of the 17th century, leaving their mark on the region's history.